TJs One of Us. TJs One of Us. I am Shane Mead with the Always Next Year podcast. This is the TJs One of Us segment here for the Always Next Year podcast. Doing this one solo tonight. 76ers just fell to the Warriors 120-117 on their home court. We're going to do a quick one in studio now. We were unable to get the Sixers segment up earlier this week. So we're going to get one Sixers one up, one Flyers one up. But as I mentioned, the 76ers fell on their home court 120-117 against the Warriors tonight. After the break, they are 3-2. Each game, with the exception of the Portland game, which was an embarrassment, has been close. So 5 games after the break now, all 5 without Joel Embiid. Joe continues to be out nursing some tendonitis in his knee. The reports now are that he is expected back at some point next week, which is, look, obviously it's certainly, good news. But better news for that, specifically because Bobby's hurt. Joe's hurt. Jonah Bolden has apparently just never learned to keep his feet on the ground, so he's constantly in foul trouble. Amir Johnson is currently out. Patton didn't play yet, still not going to play some, so they don't have a big. So these guys can't come back soon enough. But one thing to take away from these 5 games, despite the 3-2 record, despite the loss to the Warriors tonight, despite the loss against Portland that should have never happened, is they're playing competitive basketball without arguably one of the top 3 players in the world, in Joel Embiid. And they're doing so without Bobby, since I believe the Portland game is when he got either Portland or against the Pelicans. But what they're able to do right now, as this team and as this new Big Four have come together and the rotations are becoming a little bit smoother and different guys are learning their positions and their spots and roles within this team and within different time periods of the game, you're really starting to see this team come together. So just a couple things that I'm noticing since the All-Star break. Number one, especially without Joel Embiid in there, is Ben Simmons looks far more assertive and confident than he has possibly at any point that I can recall him. You'd like to see that confidence continue once Joe's back. You don't want to see that kind of waver once the full complement of players are available to him again. But he's shooting the basketball. He's driving the lane hard. He has struggled from the line, but he is still getting himself there, which is important. I will say one thing that goes kind of hand in hand with his offensive assertiveness and his defensive awareness is, we'll start with the defensive side first. So with that defensive awareness and his defensive intensity at times when he chooses to show it, which through these 5 games has been pretty consistent. Possibly the Portland game, is probably the only one that's a little up in the air, but that team as a whole looked like garbage that night. That turns to a lot of fast break opportunities, right? So when he's crashing the boards, when his hands are active and he's picking up steals and when he's slashing through, he looks like a different player. My only problem with that is he does at times still look out of control. So as good as his court vision is, sometimes I feel like his actions are moving just a hair quicker than what his brain can kind of process throughout each one of those breaks. So his turnovers throughout these 5 games is something that I would certainly like to see get a little bit more under control. But quickly, first game after the break was a 106-102 win versus the Heat. It was the final time that Dwayne Wade will play in theoretically, the final time that he will play in the Wells Fargo Center. Some people do still joke that there's the possibility that he will join the Lakers next year. I don't discount that thought. But Dwayne Wade played like Dwayne Wade does in that building and against this team. So he played extremely well, and he did the jersey swap, which has become a bit of a tradition right now for him as he goes to visiting arenas for the last time on his tour, or again, theoretically, the last time on his tour. Followed that up with the score makes it look even tolerable. Don't let that fool you. This was a terrible, terrible basketball game. 76ers would lose 130-115 versus Portland. One of the things that stuck out with me is in Ben Simmons' postgame, he mentioned things along the line of they wanted it more in terms of offensive rebounds that they were giving up, and that there was a lack of effort and a lack of intensity. That's something you cannot have, especially second game out of a week-long break or a 6-day long break, whatever it was, for the All-Star break. You can't come out there flat, and you especially can't come out there flat against freaking Portland. But I mentioned the offensive rebounding there. They were out-rebounded on the offensive glass 19-7. When you allow 19 offensive rebounds, you're never going to win a basketball game. It's just not going to happen. And from watching that game for most of it that I had seen, it was a lack of effort. It wasn't, sometimes these shots just don't fall to the hands of a 76er. It doesn't matter how good your positioning is. It clanks off the rim just an odd way. That was not the case. They looked dead out there, and that was a serious problem. They were out-rebounded on the night 53-33, and you just can't win basketball games that way. In a game that was far closer than it should have been, the 76ers won 111-110 against the Pelicans, but one thing that stood out to me in that particular game is they were able to win late, and they were able to win late without Joel Embiid. And those type of wins are the things that they need to focus on through the second half of this season, or for the last 30 games of the season, whatever it may be at this point. If you can grind out some difficult games such as that one, that bodes well for postseason basketball. That every possession is going to be like the final few possessions of that Pelicans game. So if you can come out on top on that, again, Pelicans not the best of competition, certainly not now. And they had no business being in that game, but they were, Pelicans meaning. Again, that bodes well for a learning experience going into the postseason. Follow that up with they finally beat the Oklahoma City Thunder, 108-104. They did this without Paul George. Everyone likes to remind us of that. We did this without Joel Embiid, arguably a more important player, and I know that PG-13 right now, he's playing another level of basketball I've never seen him play. For as talented of a player that he is, this year has been something incredible. But Joel Embiid is arguably the most important player to any team in the NBA. So good to finally see. I think it was 18 or 19 wins. I think 2008 was the last time that they beat the Thunder, which is just unfucking believable. But that brings you up again to tonight, 120-117. They lose to the Warriors. So before we get into a little bit of some of the reasoning into that, we'll touch on this just to dismiss it because I'm going to forget about it. I just got the tweet again. So Zaire Smith, news did break that he is going to miss the remainder of this season. Not that at this point should become a shock to anyone in the Philadelphia fan base. But Zaire Smith will miss the rest of this season. He's going to work on his conditioning, going to work on his game. And like every other Philadelphia 76ers first-round pick, we expect him back. Look, Rookie of the Year, 2027. Who the fuck knows when these people are going to play? But Warriors game, getting back to that, just did not want to forget the Zaire Smith comment there. Like I said, some of these tweets are coming in now as I'm reading them, which is not good for fluency of a show, but fuck it. But again, playing the Warriors tonight. Common theme on Twitter, and it's driving me absolutely insane, is after every single loss, and this has been well documented and over talked constantly, is that every time the 76ers lose a basketball game, it is 150% Brett Brown's fault. We are a pro Brett Brown podcast. I am a pro Brett Brown host. If you bring and talk that mess on my timeline, you're the reason I buy 6 phones a year. I smash things because I get so freaking angry at the just complete incompetency of you as a human being to watch that team on a night like tonight and say that Brett Brown was the problem. Brett Brown was not the problem. Brett Brown very rarely is the problem. I'd actually like to compliment Brett Brown for the duration of his Philadelphia tenure because every single year as he enters a basketball season, his role changes immensely. It's not even in question. But tonight in particular, your best shooters of the basketball all went cold. Everyone. JJ couldn't stroke anything. Tobias Harris, until that late 3, really had an off night. That was a difficult night for him. Who the hell else do we have? I'm blanking on a name right now. I know I'm blanking. Oh, Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler didn't play that great tonight again. Outside, look, he hit a nice 4-point play there. Wasn't really a foul, but I take it. But when you're 3 shooters that you have in your rotation right now can't shoot, and the best shooter on your team tonight was Mike freaking Scott, you're probably not going to win that game. So the fact that they were in it until the final possession, that blows my damn mind. And one of the reasons we even had an opportunity at the end of that game is because TJ, who is one of us, which, by the way, if you do listen to our show, if you listen to this show and this segment, begin to use the hashtag TJs One of Us. We'll get those tweets and we'll put the best things that we have. We'll put them in on the show. We'll read anything that you guys have for us. But TJ made a great defensive play late. It's probably like 50 seconds left in the game, maybe even less, I think, at that point, where he knocked the ball out of the hands of Durant, where it ended up going off his right hand again, and again, giving the 76ers another possession, which I don't know of another player on the team outside of Jimmy Butler at times that makes that type of a play. So that was pretty great. But transition this into a 120 to 117 loss against a top 3 team in the NBA, and of this decade, that organization, the Warriors over there, are you're not going to find a better run team with more talent and more depth and talent than what they have. So to hang with them without our best player, and again, a top player in the world in Joel Embiid, that's pretty goddamn impressive. So to me, I'd say Brett Brown's doing a pretty good fucking job. So for the remainder of the time that we talk on this podcast, we're going to talk a little Brett Brown here. So if you are not a Brett Brown fan, I encourage you to listen, take notes, and start looking at these things just a little bit different. Hopefully pique your interest in Brett Brown as a coach and give you a different perspective and a better understanding and appreciation to who and what he brings to the Philadelphia 76ers. If you do like Brett Brown, you could turn it off if you want. You don't really need to hear this. If you want to listen, by all means, keep it on. But I mentioned it earlier. So Brett Brown has entered every single season with the expectation of one, we've made a first-round draft pick, and because they were terrible for so long, they were high draft picks. He had to do this without Joel Embiid, and he had to do without Ben Simmons, Markelle Fultz, and that entire saga there. Now Zaire Smith. That's a first-round draft pick and an integral piece to your puzzle and to your rotation, and as Brett Brown is preparing for, and Brett Brown makes that trade for Zaire Smith. Again, if you remember, he was acting as the general manager during that draft process after the Colangelo mess. But he obviously makes these moves and decisions, and when you enter in this season with the expectation that those 4 names are there and available for you, whether they are starting, whether the progress and expectations for them is to be a 6th, 7th, or 8th guy, onto the floor and work their way into a starting rotation and to build up that NBA style of play. He inevitably had a plan going into these seasons. You can't plan on Ben Simmons or on Joel Embiid having the kind of recovery time that he needed to get back out on the floor, and you couldn't plan on him missing. He played the 30 games in his first year, 31 games, whatever it was. You couldn't plan on him then missing the remainder of that season as well after the Houston game. Ben Simmons, you can't plan on him breaking his foot. You couldn't plan on Zaire Smith and his injury this year. You couldn't plan that Markelle Fultz forgot what a therapist was and didn't know what a basketball was. You can't plan for those things. That's impossible. You're entering the season without one of the key pieces, whether, again, they weren't going to be the pieces right away, but they were a piece, and they were a really fucking important one. Entering those seasons without those guys, that's fucking hard. Then you sit there and you realize that last year when they make that long run in the playoffs and they get hot and they become one of the hottest teams going into the playoffs last year, it was in large part due to a rotation, right? Because we acquired Ersan Ilyasova and we acquired Marco Bellinelli. Now, those guys don't just fit in. Brett Brown's got to figure that rotation out. He's got to figure out how to use a second unit that he's never had before. And he did it. He did it wonderfully. Last year, it wasn't until later. Look, honestly, If Robert Covington could shoot in the playoffs and remembered how to play defense in the playoffs, and I am a huge Robert Covington fan. I was pro Robert Covington. I love him. But there's no question that what he put and displayed on the floor in Boston was fucking garbage. That's not Brett Brown. Brett Brown has nothing to do with that. The man just forgot how to play for a couple weeks. That shit's not Brett Brown. But Brett Brown, what he did do was put together and learn his players and build a rotation that made them an extremely competitive basketball team last year, probably a year early, right? Enter this year, Markelle Fultz thrusts him into the starting lineup, sink or swim, kid. Well, obviously, one of his floaties deflated, and this man was paddling and treading for anything that would keep him up on the surface, and nothing was fucking working. We acquire Jimmy Butler, and the guy loses his damn mind. End of Markelle Fultz. That's insane. Brett Brown couldn't have planned on acquiring a Jimmy Butler. I don't really think that was initially in the cards going into this season. Well, now you have to sit there and integrate one of the biggest personalities and minds in the game into your team and locker room. How do you make this devilish person, as the national media would leak it and make it appear that Jimmy Butler is, how do you make him fit in your locker room? He's done it. He's done a damn good job of it too. Jimmy Butler, look, he has not been the same player since coming to Philadelphia. I love Jimmy Butler. I was not a huge fan of the trade when it first happened. Again, speaking on, I loved Robert Covington. I loved Dario Saric. Dario Saric to me was the most important Sixer on the roster for a long period of time there. Just in terms of his versatility to what he could bring night in and night out. But there's no question that what we got in Jimmy Butler was something we sorely lacked and what we really fucking needed. He found a way to make Jimmy buy in. Jimmy right now is averaging the 4th or 5th most shot attempts on this team right now. Jimmy's not a problem. Is anyone seeing Jimmy Butler being a fucking problem? He's not. That's Brett Brown. How many other coaches could do what he's doing right now with a Jimmy Butler? Then in the middle of the night, you acquire Tobias Harris. Now, Tobias to me seems like the ultimate team guy, and he wants to win. He wants to go out and play really good basketball, and that's all he cares about. That's probably a little easier of a project, so to speak, into integrating him into that locker room than it probably was for Jimmy Butler. But that being said, you're still acquiring a guy who was playing for a garbage team before us, who was used to putting the ball up 20 times a night, 25 times a night, to, hey, you got to share the ball with Joel Embiid, Jimmy Butler, Ben Simmons, JJ Redick, who's shooting the ball a ton. I don't know how many touches you're going to get, and they've all bought in. They've all bought in. So there's a culture now that's being bred in this, first of all, in the city of Philadelphia, but if you look specifically at the 76ers, watch them win a basketball game. Watch what that locker room is like. Ring that fucking bell. They sit there, they have so much fun, so much chemistry together, and the way that they interview with each other, that's something that only Brett Brown can do. At least that's my opinion. So what he's been able to do in terms of making all these pieces fit and then making an entirely new second unit again when you get Bobby. Now, again, he's hurt. But you get your regional manager who averages 5 points a night, unless he plays the Warriors, in which case he apparently averages 25. Simmons, Ennis, you got all these people coming off the bench now that you didn't have 2 weeks ago. And he's had to make it work on the fly. I have no question in his ability to making puzzle pieces that shouldn't fit together. Brett Brown is a damn good basketball coach. Is he perfect? Certainly not. Are there times where his time management is not perfect? Yeah. There are times where he's got to call timeouts a little sooner. But you know what? There's times that Pop's got to call those too. There's times that Doc Rivers in 2008 to 2011 needed to do that too. Every coach runs into those issues, but they're not on the hot seat 24/7. I got news for you. Put any other coach right now that's on the market. Put them in with for Brett Brown right now. This team is nowhere near as good. Jimmy Butler doesn't re-sign next year. Harris doesn't re-sign next year. The reason that they make this work is because of Brett Brown. We will go back with another segment on the 76ers. So Kevin, again, I know we've said this the last couple weeks, but Kevin's been out for a little while now. We expect him, We do expect him back at some point next week. If you did follow along with the game tonight on the Twitter account, on the @ANY podcast account, that was Kev live tweeting that one. So him being back on the Twitter account is pretty good news for us, which means we'll should theoretically have him back in studio pretty soon. But for the time being, continue to use the hashtag that I gave you earlier in this segment. It's hashtag TJs One of Us. We're going to use that specifically for this segment. There's going to be a hashtag created for each segment now going forward. So when you have comments or questions or anything that you want to put in, you don't have to wait for mailbag segments anymore. You can continue to use our website for mailbag questions. You can use the Twitter just blankly for mailbag questions, but do start to also use the hashtag of hashtag TJs One of Us. That way we know it's specific to this segment. But that's going to wrap this one up for the 76ers segment, the TJs One of Us segment. I am Shane Mead of the Always Next Year podcast, and I'll be back shortly with a Flyer segment. So if you listen to our Get Pucked segment, I'll be back with that shortly.